My name is Tessa, and I'm 58 years old. If you saw me on the street, you'd probably think I'm just another middle-aged woman trying to get through her day. But I need to tell you something that's been eating at my soul for months now. Something about how the people we love most can sometimes hurt us the deepest, and how sometimes the cruelest words come from the mouths we once kissed goodnight. I used to be a nurse. For 32 years, I took care of other people's pain, held their hands when they were scared, stayed up all night making sure they felt safe. I thought I was good at healing. I thought I understood suffering. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the kind of hurt that comes from your own child looking at you like you're nothing more than an inconvenience. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and the rain was coming down so hard it felt like the sky was crying. I'd just gotten back from the grocery store, my clothes soaked through because my umbrella had broken in the wind. My arthritis was acting up something fierce. You know how it gets when the weather changes. And I was struggling to carry 4 heavy bags up the front steps of what used to feel like my own home. The house where I'd raised my son Evan after his father died. The house where I'd worked double shifts to pay the mortgage. Where I'd stayed up countless nights when he had fever or nightmares. Where I'd celebrated his graduations and birthdays and every small victory that made me proud to be his mother. The house that now felt more like a prison than a sanctuary. I fumbled with the keys, my fingers numb from the cold rain, and finally managed to get inside. Water dripped from my coat onto the hardwood floors I'd refinished myself years ago, back when I still believed that making a house beautiful mattered, that creating a warm home would somehow guarantee a warm family. "Mom!" Evan's voice cut through the quiet like a blade. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, 28 years old, and looking at me with the kind of irritation you'd reserve for a stranger who'd just spilled coffee on your shirt. "You forgot the soda again." I stood there, still dripping, still catching my breath from the struggle up those steps, and I felt something crack inside my chest. Not my heart. That was already broken from months of this treatment. Something deeper, something that had been holding me together for years. I'm sorry, honey," I whispered, the words automatic after so many similar moments. "I can go back." "You can't do anything right!" he exploded, yanking open the refrigerator door so hard it shook the whole appliance. "I asked for one thing, and you can't even remember that." The silence that followed was deafening. I stood there in my soaked clothes, grocery bags still in my hands, watching my son, the boy I'd given everything for, treat me like I was the hired help he couldn't fire but wished would disappear. If you've ever felt invisible in your own home, you know that pain. If you've ever given your whole heart to someone who hands it back to you in pieces, you understand why I'm telling you this story. Because maybe you need to hear that you're not alone. Maybe you need to know that someone else has felt this crushing weight of unappreciated love. If you connect with stories like this, if you understand what it means to love someone who's forgotten how to love you back, please subscribe to our channel. We're trying to reach 1,000 subscribers, and it really helps us continue sharing these important stories. And please, comment and tell me what city you're watching from. Sometimes knowing we're not alone makes all the difference. My husband David died when Evan was only 15. A heart attack at 45. Sudden, cruel, final. One minute we were planning Evan's college fund over breakfast, and the next minute I was a widow trying to figure out how to be both parents to a grieving teenager. I remember those early months after David's funeral, how Evan would crawl into bed with me when the nightmares came, how he'd wrap his skinny arms around me and whisper, "We're going to be okay, right, Mom? We've got each other, right?" And I'd hold him tight and promise him yes. We'd always have each other. We'd be a team. We'd get through anything as long as we stuck together. I worked 3 jobs that first year. My regular nursing shifts at the hospital, weekend work at an urgent care clinic, and overnight shifts at a nursing home. I barely slept. I ate peanut butter sandwiches for dinner more nights than I can count because I wanted to make sure Evan had everything he needed. Real meals, new clothes when he outgrew them, money for school activities so he wouldn't feel different from the other kids. When he got accepted to college, I cried with joy. When he graduated, I was the proudest mother in that auditorium. When he came back home afterward and said he needed time to figure out his next steps, I said, of course, take all the time you need. This is your home, too. That was 3 years ago. 3 years of watching him sleep until noon while I got up at 6 to go to work. 3 years of cooking meals he'd leave half-eaten on the counter without so much as a thank you. 3 years of paying all the bills while he spent whatever money he made from his part-time job on things that mattered only to him. But it wasn't really about the money. It wasn't even about the housework or the cooking or the way he treated our home like a hotel. It was about the way he looked at me, or more accurately, the way he'd stopped looking at me at all. When did I become invisible to the child I'd moved heaven and earth to protect? The next morning, I woke up with a headache that felt like my skull was splitting open. I'd barely slept, replaying that moment in the kitchen over and over. The way Evan had looked at me, not with anger really, but with something worse. Disappointment, like I was a constant source of failure in his life. I made coffee in the quiet kitchen, my hands still shaking slightly from exhaustion and hurt. The grocery bags from yesterday sat exactly where I'd left them on the counter. Evan hadn't bothered to put anything away. The milk I'd struggled to carry home in the rain would probably spoil if I didn't deal with it soon. As I started unpacking the groceries, I heard his bedroom door open upstairs. Heavy footsteps on the hardwood, the bathroom door slamming shut. Our morning routine had become this dance of avoidance. Me tiptoeing around, trying not to wake him too early, him moving through the house like I wasn't even there. When he finally came downstairs, hair messy and still in yesterday's clothes, he walked straight to the refrigerator without acknowledging me, opened it, stared inside for a long moment, then closed it with an exaggerated sigh. "Still no soda," he muttered, loud enough for me to hear but not quite directed at me. Like I was a malfunctioning appliance he was complaining about to himself. "Good morning to you too, sweetheart," I said softly, hoping to bridge the gap that seemed to grow wider every day. He glanced at me with those eyes that used to light up when I walked into a room. Now they held nothing but irritation. "Are you going to the store today?" Not, "How did you sleep?" Or, "Thanks for buying groceries in that terrible rain yesterday." Just a question about what I could do for him today. I suppose I could," I said, already reaching for my purse. Already giving in, like I always did. "What do you need?" "The soda I asked for yesterday. And we're out of those frozen pizzas." He was scrolling through his phone now, not even looking at me. "And get the good ones this time, not the cheap store brand." The good ones. The expensive ones that cost twice as much as the store brand that tasted exactly the same. But I nodded anyway, because somewhere deep in my heart, I was still that mother who wanted her child to be happy, even when he'd forgotten how to make me feel like I mattered. "Evan," I said carefully, "I was thinking maybe we could have dinner together tonight. I could cook that pot roast you used to love when you were little." He looked up from his phone finally, and for a split second, I thought I saw something soften in his expression, but then it was gone, replaced by that familiar impatience. "I'm going out tonight," he said. "Marcus is having people over." Marcus. His friend from high school who still lived with his parents too. But somehow Marcus's situation was different. Marcus was figuring things out and taking time to find himself. When Evan talked about Marcus, there was respect in his voice. Admiration even. When he talked about me, there was nothing. "Oh," I said, trying not to let the disappointment show. "Well, maybe tomorrow night then." He was already walking away, phone pressed to his ear. "Yeah, Marcus. I'll be there around 8. Yeah, my mom can give me a ride if my car's still acting up." My mom. Not my mother or mom. Just my mom, like I was a service provider rather than the woman who'd given birth to him, raised him, loved him through every scraped knee and broken heart and teenage crisis. I stood in that kitchen, listening to him make plans that didn't include me, and I felt something I'd never felt before in my own home. I felt like a stranger, like an unwelcome guest who'd overstayed her welcome but had nowhere else to go. Later that morning, I called my sister Janet. She lived 2 states away, but we talked every few weeks, usually about safe topics: the weather, her grandchildren, my work at the hospital before I retired. I'd never told her how bad things had gotten with Evan. "Tessa, honey, you sound tired," she said after we'd exchanged pleasantries. "Everything okay?" For a moment, I considered telling her everything. About how Evan spoke to me, about how I felt like a servant in my own home, about how the son I'd sacrificed everything for had somehow turned into someone I barely recognized. But then I heard him upstairs, laughing at something on his computer, and I remembered how proud Janet had been when Evan graduated college, how she'd bragged to her friends about her nephew, the college graduate, who was so close to his mother. "Oh, you know how it is," I said instead. "Just the usual challenges of having an adult child at home. At least you have company," Janet said with a laugh. "I rattle around this house by myself since the kids moved out. You're lucky Evan wants to stay close to home." Lucky? The word sat heavy in my stomach like a stone. That afternoon, I went to the grocery store again. Same aisles, same fluorescent lights, same mechanical routine of checking items off a list that never seemed to get shorter. The expensive soda, the good frozen pizzas, the pot roast I'd cook for myself since Evan would be out. At the checkout, the young cashier smiled at me with genuine warmth. "Find everything okay today, ma'am?" "Yes, thank you," I replied, and I realized it was the first kind interaction I'd had all day. "I love your sweater," she added, scanning my items. "That blue is beautiful on you." Such a small thing, such a simple compliment. But it made my eyes water because I couldn't remember the last time someone in my own family had said anything kind to me about anything. "Thank you, dear," I managed. "You have a lovely day." Driving home, I caught myself in the rearview mirror at a red light. When had those lines around my eyes gotten so deep? When had my shoulders started curving forward like I was trying to make myself smaller? When had I started looking like a woman who'd given up? Back home, Evan was getting ready to go out. I could hear him moving around upstairs, probably looking for a clean shirt that I'd washed and folded and put in his dresser without him ever asking me to do it or thanking me afterward. "Mom," he called down the stairs. "Did you wash my blue shirt?" "It's in your dresser," I called back. "Second drawer." "No, thank you." No acknowledgement of the time I'd spent doing his laundry while he slept in or played video games. Just an expectation that his needs would be met by magic, or by me, which apparently amounted to the same thing in his mind. When he came downstairs, he did look handsome in that blue shirt. For just a moment, he looked like the little boy who used to hug me goodbye before school, who used to tell me I was the best mom in the world. "You look nice," I said, because I couldn't help myself. Because somewhere under all this hurt and disappointment, I still loved him with that fierce, protective love that mothers know. He glanced at himself in the hallway mirror, adjusting his collar. "Yeah, this shirt's okay. It's getting kind of old, though. Not, 'Thank you for washing it,' or 'Thanks for taking care of me.' Just a criticism of the shirt I'd bought him for his birthday last year. "Can you drive me to Marcus's?" he asked, pocketing his phone and wallet. "My car's making that noise again." Of course it was. The car I'd helped him buy, that he'd never learned to maintain properly, that always seemed to have problems when he needed to go somewhere, but never when he needed to look for a better job or help around the house. "Of course," I said, grabbing my keys, because that's what I did. That's what I'd always done. During the 15-minute drive to Marcus's apartment complex, Evan stared out the window or at his phone. No conversation. No, "How was your day?" or "Thanks for the ride." Just silence punctuated by the occasional sigh when traffic moved too slowly for his liking. When we pulled up to Marcus's building, he opened the car door immediately, already halfway out before we'd come to a complete stop. "I'll get a ride home," he said without looking back. "Don't wait up." And then he was gone, jogging up the stairs to spend the evening with people who apparently appreciated his company more than he appreciated mine. I sat in that parking lot for a long time, watching young people come and go from the apartment building, laughing, calling out to each other, embracing when they met. Living the kind of life I remembered having when I was their age, when the future felt full of possibilities instead of emptiness. When did my son stop seeing me as a person worth knowing? When did I become just the woman who cooked his food and washed his clothes and asked nothing in return except a little basic human decency? As I drove home to my empty house, I realized something that made my chest tight with panic. I was 58 years old, and I'd spent so many years defining myself as Evan's mother that I'd forgotten who Tessa was supposed to be. The following week, I decided to try something different. Maybe I'd been approaching this all wrong. Maybe Evan needed to see that I wasn't just his mother. I was a person with interests and dreams and stories worth sharing. Maybe if I made more of an effort to connect with his world, he'd remember how to connect with mine. I spent an entire Saturday morning researching the video games he played, the music he listened to, the movies he watched with his friends. I felt foolish Googling things like how to talk to your adult son and rebuilding relationships with grown children. But desperation makes you do things that would have seemed impossible just months before. When he came downstairs that afternoon, I was ready. "Evan, honey," I said, looking up from my laptop with what I hoped was casual interest. "I was reading about that game you're always playing, the one with the different worlds. It sounds really creative." He paused on his way to the kitchen, actually stopping to look at me with something that might have been surprise. For a moment, my heart lifted. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was the bridge we needed. "You were reading about video games?" he asked, and there was something in his tone I couldn't quite place. Not interest exactly, but not immediate dismissal either. "Yes. I thought maybe you could show me how it works sometime. It seems like something you're really passionate about, and I'd love to understand it better." The silence stretched between us. I watched his face carefully, hopefully, waiting for that spark of connection I remembered from when he was younger, and would spend hours telling me about everything that mattered to him. Instead, he shook his head with a small, bitter laugh. "Mom, you wouldn't get it. It's not really something for people your age. People your age. Like 58 was ancient. Like being his mother automatically disqualified me from understanding anything that brought him joy." "I might surprise you," I said gently. "I used to be pretty good at puzzles and strategy games when I was younger. Remember those chess matches we used to have?" "That's different," he said, already moving toward the kitchen again. "That was kid stuff. Kid stuff. Our chess games, which had lasted for years, which he'd been so proud of when he finally started beating me regularly, which I'd let him win sometimes because seeing his face light up with victory was worth more than any game. Dismissed as kid stuff. I tried again the next day. I'd remembered that his friend Marcus worked at a local music store, and Evan had mentioned wanting to learn guitar years ago. Maybe music could be our connection. "I was thinking," I said when he emerged from his room around noon, "maybe we could look into guitar lessons. There's a music school downtown, and I saw they have adult beginner classes. We could take them together." This time, he didn't even pause in his journey to the refrigerator. "I'm not really interested in that anymore, Mom. That was just something I said once. But you used to love music. You had such a good ear for it when you were little." "When I was little," he repeated, emphasis heavy on those last 3 words. "I'm not little anymore. I don't need you signing us up for activities like I'm still in elementary school." The dismissal was so swift, so complete, that I felt something shrivel up inside my chest. He wasn't even willing to consider that we might enjoy something together. The very idea of spending time with me seemed to irritate him, but I kept trying. God help me, I kept trying. I offered to take him to dinner at his favorite restaurant. I'm not really hungry for that kind of food anymore. I suggested we watch a movie together. I'm probably going to fall asleep. Long day. I asked if he wanted to go for a drive, maybe visit the lake where we used to feed ducks when he was small. I've got plans with Marcus. Always plans with Marcus. Always somewhere else to be. Someone else to see. Anything that didn't involve spending time with the woman who'd raised him. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in October. I'd spent the entire day cooking his favorite meal, the same lasagna I'd made for his birthday every year since he turned 12. I'd gone to 3 different stores to find all the right ingredients, the expensive cheese he preferred, the Italian sausage from that special deli across town. I set the table with our good dishes, the ones we only used for holidays. I lit candles. I even bought a bottle of wine, thinking maybe if we shared a drink like adults, we could have an adult conversation. When Evan came downstairs and saw the setup, he stopped in the doorway with an expression I couldn't quite read. "What's all this?" he asked, and there was something in his voice that made my stomach clench with anxiety. "I made your favorite," I said, trying to sound cheerful and casual. "I thought we could have a nice dinner together. We haven't done that in a while." He stood there for a long moment, looking at the table, at the candles, at the wine, at me and my nice blouse that I'd changed into 3 times because I wanted everything to be perfect. "Mom," he said finally, and his tone was gentle in a way that somehow made what came next even worse. This is kind of pathetic." Pathetic. The word hit me like a physical blow. I just thought, "You're trying so hard," he continued. And now he wasn't looking at me at all. He was looking at the floor, at his hands, anywhere but at my face. It's like you're desperate for attention or something. It's uncomfortable. Desperate for attention. From my own son. In my own home. With food I'd spent all day preparing because I remembered how his eyes used to light up when I surprised him with his favorite meal. "I'm not desperate," I said quietly, but my voice sounded strange and small, even to me. "I just miss talking to you. I miss us." "There is no us, Mom. I'm 28 years old. I'm not your little buddy anymore. I don't need you to plan special dinners and activities for us. It's weird. Weird. Missing my son was weird. Wanting to spend time with him was desperate. Trying to maintain some kind of relationship was pathetic." I stood there in my dining room, surrounded by the evidence of my efforts. The good plates, the candles, the wine I'd never opened, the lasagna that was getting cold while my heart broke into smaller and smaller pieces. "I see," I managed to say. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize." "It's fine," he said, but he was already backing toward the stairs. "I'm going to Marcus's anyway. We're working on something for his job." Of course he was. Marcus's job was important enough to warrant Evan's time and attention. Marcus's projects deserved his enthusiasm and energy. I was just the woman who made him lasagna and called it pathetic. After he left, I sat at that carefully set table by myself and ate one small portion of the meal I'd spent all day preparing. The rest would go in the refrigerator, where it would sit untouched until I finally threw it away a week later, just like the pot roast from the week before. Just like all the other special meals I'd made, hoping to bridge the gap that seemed to grow wider every day. I blew out the candles and put away the good dishes and poured the wine down the sink, because drinking alone felt too much like giving up, and I wasn't ready to give up yet. But sitting in that quiet kitchen, with the smell of Italian sausage and expensive cheese filling the air like a mockery of my efforts, I realized something that made me feel hollow inside. I was becoming one of those women I used to feel sorry for. The ones who called their adult children too often, who tried too hard to stay relevant in lives that had moved on without them, who couldn't accept that the center of their universe didn't want to orbit around them anymore. I was becoming the pathetic, desperate mother that my own son couldn't stand to be around. The next morning, I found a $20 bill on the kitchen counter with a note. "For groceries. Thanks for the food." He was paying me, like I was the housekeeper. Like the meals I cooked and the home I provided were services he could purchase rather than expressions of love from someone who'd given him everything. I picked up that $20 bill and stared at it until my eyes blurred with tears I refused to let fall. This was what our relationship had become. A financial transaction, payment for services rendered. When I heard his door open upstairs, I quickly folded the bill and put it in my purse. I couldn't let him see how much it hurt. I couldn't give him another reason to call me pathetic or desperate or weird. But as I went through the motions of another day, making coffee he wouldn't drink with me, washing clothes he wouldn't thank me for, cleaning a house he treated like a hotel, I felt something fundamental shifting inside me. For 28 years, I'd defined myself as Evan's mother. But what was I supposed to be when being his mother became something he found embarrassing? What was left of me when the most important relationship in my life became a source of shame for the person I loved most in the world? I didn't know the answer to that question yet. But for the first time, sitting in my empty kitchen with the taste of rejection bitter in my mouth, I was beginning to understand that I needed to find out. 3 weeks passed after the lasagna incident, and something inside me had gone quiet. Not peaceful quiet. The kind of silence that comes when you've screamed yourself hoarse and there's no voice left to make a sound. I moved through my days like a ghost in my own home. And honestly, I think that's exactly how Evan preferred it. I stopped trying to engage him in conversation, stopped cooking special meals, stopped asking about his day or his plans or his dreams. I got up in the morning, made my coffee, and sat at the kitchen table reading the newspaper like a woman who lived alone. Which, in every way that mattered, I did. The house felt different now, smaller somehow, as if my surrender had sucked all the air out of the rooms. I found myself spending more time in my bedroom, reading books I'd been meaning to get to for years, watching television shows that Evan would have criticized as boring or too old-fashioned. At least in my room, I didn't have to witness his indifference. At least there, I could pretend I was choosing solitude instead of having it forced on me. But even that small refuge felt contaminated by sadness. This was the room I'd shared with David, where we'd whispered about our hopes for Evan's future, where we'd held each other and promised we'd raise him right, give him everything we'd never had. The irony was so sharp it cut. We'd succeeded in giving him everything, including the luxury of taking his mother for granted. One evening in early November, I was sitting in my chair by the window, watching the neighbors' children playing in their yard. A little girl with pigtails was chasing her older brother around a pile of fallen leaves, both of them laughing with that pure joy that children have before the world teaches them to be careful with their happiness. I remembered Evan at that age, how he used to run to me when he skinned his knee, how he'd curl up in my lap when thunder scared him, how he'd beg me to read just one more story before bedtime. How did that trusting little boy become this stranger who paid me for cooking his food? The front door opened and closed downstairs. Evan was home from wherever he'd spent the day, probably Marcus's place, probably doing something more important than acknowledging the woman who'd given him life. I heard his footsteps in the kitchen, the refrigerator opening and closing, cabinets banging as he looked for something to eat. I waited, like I always did now, for the sound of his feet on the stairs as he retreated to his room, where he didn't have to see me or think about me or pretend I mattered. But instead, I heard something different. Voices. Multiple voices. He'd brought someone home. I crept to the top of the stairs, not to eavesdrop exactly, but because hearing other people in my house felt so foreign now that I needed to confirm it was real. The voice I heard made my stomach clench with a familiar mix of hope and dread. Marcus. And someone else. A woman, laughing at something one of them had said. "Your mom around?" Marcus asked, and I held my breath waiting for Evan's response. "She's probably in her room," Evan said, and his tone was so casual, so dismissive, like I was a cat that had wandered off somewhere. "She pretty much stays up there now. Gives us more space." More space. As if my presence in my own home was an inconvenience to be managed, rather than a natural part of the family dynamic. "That's cool," the woman said. "My mom's the same way since I moved back home. Like, she tries to give me privacy, but it's obvious she's just avoiding the awkwardness." They were talking about me like I was a problem they'd all learned to navigate. The difficult mother who couldn't accept that her usefulness had expired. The woman upstairs who made things uncomfortable just by existing in the space she'd worked for decades to create. I backed away from the stairs, my face burning with shame I had no right to feel in my own house. But that's what I'd become. Someone who needed to apologize for taking up space, who should be grateful for being tolerated in the home I'd made possible. That night, after the visitors left and Evan had gone to his room, I sat on the edge of my bed and looked around at the space that had become my entire world. The dresser where I kept David's cologne, even though the scent had faded years ago. The jewelry box he'd given me for our 10th anniversary, filled with pieces I never wore because there was nowhere special to go anymore. The photo on my nightstand from Evan's high school graduation, both of us smiling like we couldn't imagine any future but happiness. I picked up that photo and studied it carefully. The woman in the picture looked so proud, so confident in her role as mother. She believed she was raising a man who would love and respect her always, who would see her sacrifice and honor it, who would want her in his life forever, because she'd proven herself worthy of that place. What a fool she'd been. I opened my nightstand drawer and placed the photo face down inside, next to the love letters David used to write me and the Mother's Day cards Evan had made when his hands were still too small to write neat letters. But his heart was big enough to tell me I was the best mom in the world. All of it felt like evidence of a different life, a life where I'd mattered to people who mattered to me. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of calm, not peace. I wasn't peaceful, but I was tired. Bone deep, soul deep tired of trying to be something I apparently wasn't anymore. Wanted. I made my coffee and sat at the kitchen table with my newspaper, and when Evan came downstairs, I didn't look up. Didn't say good morning. Didn't ask how he'd slept or what his plans were for the day. I just sat there, reading about other people's lives, other people's problems, Other people's children who probably still called them mom with affection instead of obligation. He moved around the kitchen behind me, getting his breakfast, and I could feel him glancing at me occasionally. Maybe my silence was strange enough to register. Maybe he was wondering why I wasn't performing my usual morning ritual of cheerful small talk that he'd made clear he didn't want. When he left the house that day, he paused by the table where I was still sitting. "See you later, Mom," he said, and there was something tentative in his voice, like he was testing whether I'd respond normally. I folded my newspaper carefully and looked up at him. Really looked at him. Maybe for the first time in weeks. He was so handsome, so full of potential, so completely unaware of what he'd done to the woman who'd loved him before he drew his first breath. "Goodbye, Evan," I said quietly. Not, "See you later." Not, "Have a good day." Just, "Goodbye." He hesitated for a moment, like he wanted to say something else, but then he shrugged and headed for the door. "Marcus is picking me up around 7, he called over his shoulder. "Don't know when I'll be back." Of course he didn't know. Why would he? It wasn't like anyone was waiting for him. It wasn't like his mother might worry or wonder, or simply want to know that he was safe and thinking of home. After he left, I sat in that kitchen for a long time, listening to the silence. The house seemed to breathe around me, settling into its bones the way old houses do. This had been our home, mine and David's and Evan's. We'd painted these walls together, chosen this furniture together, made memories in every room. But somewhere along the way, it had stopped being ours and become just mine, and now even that felt uncertain. I walked through the rooms slowly, seeing them as if for the first time. The living room where Evan used to do homework while I cooked dinner, chattering about his day and his friends and his dreams. The dining room where we'd celebrated every birthday and holiday, where he'd blown out candles and made wishes I'd hoped would come true. The family room where we'd watched movies together, where he'd fallen asleep on my shoulder during the boring parts. All of it felt like a museum now, a collection of artifacts from a family that didn't exist anymore. In the laundry room, I found myself staring at a basket of Evan's clothes that I'd washed, dried, and folded without him asking me to, without him thanking me for it, without him even acknowledging that someone had taken care of this basic need so he didn't have to think about it. I picked up one of his shirts, a blue button-down I'd bought him for a job interview that never materialized. I'd ironed it carefully, hopefully, imagining him wearing it to impress an employer who might give him purpose and direction, and maybe some pride in himself. Instead, it had hung in his closet for months, ignored like everything else I'd done with love. Standing there with his shirt in my hands, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger. I was too tired for anger. Not sadness. I'd cried all those tears already. Something else. Something quieter, but infinitely more dangerous. I was done. Not done loving him. I didn't think I could ever stop that, no matter how much it hurt. But done trying to make him love me back. Done pretending that my efforts mattered when they clearly didn't. Done being pathetic and desperate and weird in the eyes of the child I'd raised to be better than this. I folded his shirt one last time and placed it back in the basket. But I didn't take the basket upstairs to his room like I usually did. I left it there in the laundry room, a small act of rebellion that felt enormous. For the first time in months, I had something they all seemed to have forgotten I possessed: choice. And I was beginning to understand that maybe, just maybe, the most loving thing I could do for both of us was to stop trying so hard to matter to someone who had decided I didn't. The change didn't happen overnight. It crept up on me like dawn, so gradual that I didn't notice it at first. Then suddenly there was light where darkness had been. It started small. The laundry basket I left in the laundry room instead of carrying upstairs. The second day, Evan came looking for clean clothes and found them there. He didn't say anything to me about it, just took what he needed with a slight frown, like he was trying to figure out if this was intentional or if I'd simply forgotten. I hadn't forgotten. For the first time in years, I was remembering. Remembering that laundry was a service, not an obligation. Remembering that I was a person with choices, not just a mother with duties. Remembering something my own mother had told me decades ago, when I was young and thought I knew everything about love. "Sweetheart, you can't pour from an empty cup." I'd been running on empty for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to have something left for myself. The next week, I made dinner for one. Just one portion of everything. I set the table with a single plate, a single glass, a single set of silverware. When Evan came downstairs and saw the setup, he stood in the doorway of the dining room with that same confused frown. "Is this all there is?" he asked, gesturing at my solitary meal. "That's all I made," I said simply, cutting into my chicken breast with deliberate care. "What am I supposed to eat?" For the first time in months, I looked directly at him when I answered. Really looked at him, meeting his eyes with something I hadn't felt in so long I'd almost forgotten what it was. Self-respect. "I don't know," I said calmly. "What were you planning to eat?" He stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. In a way, I suppose I had. This was the language of a woman who wasn't volunteering to solve problems she hadn't created, who wasn't taking responsibility for a grown man's basic needs just because she'd given birth to him 28 years ago. "You always make enough for both of us," he said, and there was something in his voice I couldn't quite identify. Not anger, not yet. Something more like uncertainty. "I used to," I agreed, taking another bite. "But I realized I was making assumptions about what you wanted. You've made it clear that my efforts to take care of you are, what was the word you used? Pathetic?" He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," I interrupted gently. "And that's okay. You're entitled to your opinion, but I'm also entitled to stop doing things that you find pathetic." The silence stretched between us, filled with years of unspoken resentment and misunderstood intentions. I continued eating my dinner, savoring each bite in a way I hadn't been able to do in months. Food tastes better when you're not choking on rejection. "There's sandwich stuff in the fridge," I said finally, not looking up from my plate. "Or you could order something. Or go to Marcus's house. I'm sure they'd be happy to feed you." After a long moment, I heard him walk away, heard the refrigerator open and close, heard him moving around the kitchen with the slightly aggressive motions of someone who's frustrated but can't quite articulate why. That night, I took a long bath. A real bath, with bubbles and candles and a book I'd been wanting to read. I soaked until my fingers pruned and the water began to cool, luxuriating in the simple pleasure of doing something just for me, just because I wanted to. When I finally emerged from the bathroom in my robe, Evan was in the hallway. "Mom?" he said, and his voice was different somehow. Softer. Are you mad at me?" I considered the question seriously. Was I mad? I'd been mad for months, furious and hurt and desperate for acknowledgement that never came. But now I felt something else entirely. "No," I said honestly. "I'm not mad anymore." "Then what's going on? You're acting different." "Different." Yes, I supposed I was. Different felt good. Different felt like progress. "I'm tired, Evan," I said, and the words came out more honestly than I'd intended. "I'm tired of trying to be someone you want me to be when you've made it clear that person doesn't exist. So I've decided to try being someone I want to be instead." He looked confused, like I'd presented him with a math problem he couldn't solve. "I don't understand." "I know you don't," I said, and for the first time in our conversation, I smiled. Not a bitter smile or a sad smile, but something that felt almost like peace. "But you don't have to understand. This isn't about you." That was the moment. Right there in the hallway outside my bathroom, with my hair still damp and my skin still warm from the bath, when I realized what had been missing from my life for so long. It hadn't been Evan's love or appreciation or respect, though I desperately wanted all of those things. What had been missing was me. I'd been so focused on being his mother that I'd forgotten how to be Tessa. I'd been so busy trying to matter to him that I'd stopped mattering to myself. The next day, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called in sick to my volunteer work at the community center and went to the mall by myself, not to buy anything for Evan or the house or anyone else, just to walk around and remember what it felt like to be a woman in the world instead of just a mother in a kitchen. I tried on clothes I'd never have considered before. A red dress that hugged my figure, a pair of jeans that made me look younger, a silk scarf that felt luxurious against my neck. I didn't buy any of them, but I stood in those dressing room mirrors and saw something I'd forgotten existed. Myself. At the food court, I ordered a fancy coffee drink. One of those expensive ones with multiple syllables and whipped cream that seemed frivolous when I was always worrying about the grocery budget. I sat at a small table by the window and watched people hurry past with their shopping bags and their purposeful strides, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Contentment. Not happiness exactly. I wasn't ready for that yet, but a quiet satisfaction with my own company, a sense that maybe I was worth spending time with even if my son had forgotten that fact. My phone buzzed with a text from Evan. "Where are you? Fridge is empty." I stared at that message for a long time. The old me would have panicked, would have rushed home to fill the refrigerator and apologize for not anticipating his needs. The old me would have felt guilty for being out of the house when he needed something. But the woman sitting in that food court, sipping her expensive coffee and feeling the afternoon sun through the window, wasn't the old me anymore. I typed back, "At the mall. Grocery store closes at 10. I didn't apologize. I didn't rush home. I didn't ask what he needed or offer to pick something up for him. I just stated a fact and let him figure out what to do with it. His response came quickly. "Seriously?" "Seriously," I typed back, then turned off my phone. I finished my coffee slowly, deliberately. I window shopped for another hour, looking at things that caught my eye simply because they were beautiful or interesting, not because they might solve someone else's problem or make someone else happy. When I finally drove home, I felt different, not just in my mood, but in my posture, in the way I held my shoulders, in the way I looked at the familiar streets of my neighborhood. I felt like a woman who had somewhere to go and things to think about that didn't revolve around whether her adult son was properly fed. Evan was in the kitchen when I walked in, standing in front of the open refrigerator like he'd been waiting there for hours. "Where were you?" he asked, and there was something new in his voice. Not quite concern, but not indifference either. Something that suggested my absence had been noticed in a way my presence had stopped being. "I went to the mall," I said, setting my purse on the counter with the casual confidence of a woman who didn't owe anyone an explanation for her afternoon choices. "You went to the mall," he repeated, like he was trying to process this information. "For what?" "For myself," I said simply. And for the first time in our adult relationship, he didn't have a response to that. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me still had lines around her eyes and gray in her hair and all the physical markers of a 58-year-old who'd worked hard and worried much. But there was something else there too, something that had been missing for so long I'd almost forgotten it existed. There was a spark, a suggestion that this woman had stories to tell and dreams to dream, and a life to live that didn't begin and end with being someone else's solution to every problem. I smiled at my reflection, and she smiled back with something that looked suspiciously like hope. It wasn't the hope for Evan to change or appreciate me or become the son I'd always wanted him to be. It was something more powerful and more dangerous. Hope for myself. For the first time in years, I was beginning to remember that I was worth hoping for. The changes in our house were subtle at first, like the way seasons shift so gradually that you don't notice until one day you realize the leaves have completely changed color. But they were unmistakable once you knew what to look for. I stopped asking Evan about his day, stopped leaving little notes on his dresser about appointments or reminders, stopped buying his favorite snacks during my grocery trips. Not out of spite. I was past that now. I simply stopped volunteering for a job he'd never actually given me. Instead, I started filling my days with things that had nothing to do with him. I signed up for a pottery class at the community center, something I'd always wanted to try but never had time for when I was busy managing someone else's life. My hands, which had spent decades caring for patients and then caring for my son, learned to shape clay into something beautiful and entirely my own. I reconnected with old friends from my nursing days, women I'd lost touch with when being Evan's mother became my only identity. We met for lunch at little cafes downtown, and I rediscovered the joy of conversations that didn't revolve around my domestic concerns. These women had careers, hobbies, grandchildren they adored but didn't revolve their lives around. They reminded me that motherhood was something I did, not something I was. "You look different," my friend Patricia said one afternoon over coffee. "Lighter somehow. Like you've put down a heavy bag you'd been carrying too long." She was right. I had put something down, though I couldn't have articulated what it was at the time. It was the weight of responsibility for another adult's happiness. The burden of believing that my worth depended entirely on how well I served someone who'd stopped wanting to be served. At home, Evan began to notice these changes with the gradual awareness of someone who'd taken a service for granted until it was no longer provided. He'd stand in the kitchen doorway in the evenings, watching me read at the table instead of bustling around cleaning up after dinner we'd eaten separately. He'd pause outside my bedroom when he heard me laughing at something on the phone with Patricia or one of my other friends. "Who is that?" he asked one evening after I'd hung up from a particularly animated conversation about our pottery teacher's dating mishaps. "Patricia," I said, not looking up from my book. "What's so funny?" "Something that happened in our pottery class." "You're taking pottery?" I glanced at him over my reading glasses. "For 3 weeks now." He stood there for a moment, seeming to process this information like it was somehow significant that I'd started an activity without informing him or asking his permission. "When?" he asked. "Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. That's when you usually do the grocery shopping." Usually, past tense. I'd been doing grocery shopping whenever I felt like it lately, or sometimes not at all if I had other plans. "I shop on Wednesdays now," I said simply, returning to my book. "But Wednesday is when you volunteer at the center." I stopped volunteering there. Another pause. Longer this time. "Why?" I looked at him again, really studied his face. There was confusion there, and something that might have been the beginning of concern. Not for me, exactly, but for the disruption in the routine he'd come to expect. "Because I wanted to try pottery instead." It was such a simple statement, but it hung in the air between us like a revelation. I had wanted something, so I'd chosen it. I'd made a decision based on my own desires, rather than on maintaining the infrastructure that kept his life running smoothly. The concept seemed to puzzle him. "You never mentioned wanting to do pottery." "There are a lot of things I want that I've never mentioned," I said gently. "I'm just starting to mention them to myself." Over the following days, I noticed him watching me with a new kind of attention. Not the casual dismissal I'd grown accustomed to, but something more careful, more alert. Like he was trying to solve a puzzle he hadn't realized existed. He noticed when I started eating breakfast on the back porch instead of at the kitchen table where I'd been available for whatever morning requests he might have. He noticed when I stopped washing his dishes immediately after he used them, letting them sit in the sink until I felt like dealing with them, or until he dealt with them himself. Most significantly, he noticed when I started going to bed earlier and getting up later, claiming the rhythms of my own body instead of structuring my sleep around his schedule. "Are you feeling okay?" he asked one morning when I was still in my robe at 9 o'clock, sitting on the porch with my coffee and a novel I was actually enjoying for the first time in months. "I feel fine," I said, and it was true. I felt better than fine. I felt like a person who was allowed to exist in her own house on her own terms. "You're just different lately." "Different how?" He struggled for words, and I waited patiently, curious to hear how he'd articulate the changes he was observing. "Less available, I guess." Less available. Yes, that was accurate. I was less available to be taken for granted, less available to anticipate his needs before he expressed them, less available to organize my life around his comfort. "I suppose I am," I agreed. "Is everything all right between us?" The question surprised me, not because he'd asked it, but because it suggested he'd noticed that there was an us to be concerned about. For months, I'd felt like there was only him and his needs, with me as a supporting character in his life story. "Everything is fine," I said, and I meant it. Everything was fine. For the first time in a long time, everything was exactly as fine as I was choosing to make it. But I could see in his face that my answer wasn't entirely reassuring. He wanted something more from me, some explanation, some reassurance, some return to the predictable dynamic where his mother existed primarily to make his life easier. That evening, he made an effort I hadn't seen in months. When I was in the kitchen preparing my dinner, just mine, as had become my new custom, he appeared with a dish towel and started drying the few plates I'd left in the dish drainer. "I thought I'd help out a bit," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "That's kind of you," I replied, and continued stirring my pasta sauce without the fanfare I once would have made over such a gesture. We worked in silence for a few minutes, and I could feel him glancing at me periodically, like he was waiting for me to acknowledge this unprecedented offer of assistance with the gratitude and excitement he probably expected. When the dishes were done, he lingered in the kitchen while I plated my dinner. "Mom," he said finally, "I've been thinking." I waited. "Maybe we could do something together this weekend. Like, maybe go to that new restaurant downtown, or catch a movie or something." 6 months ago, this invitation would have made me weep with joy. 6 months ago, I would have dropped everything to accommodate any interest he showed in spending time with me. I would have treated it like the precious gift I'd been praying for. Now, I simply considered it like any other social invitation. "This weekend, I'm busy," I said, carrying my plate to the dining room. "I'm going to an art fair with Patricia on Saturday, and Sunday I'm planning to work in the garden." "Oh," he said, following me. "Well, maybe next weekend then." "Maybe," I said, settling into my chair with my book propped beside my plate. "We'll see how our schedules work out." Our schedules. As if I had a schedule that mattered. As if my time had value independent of his convenience. As if I was a person with my own life instead of just his mother. He stood there for another moment, clearly uncertain about what to do with this new version of me. This woman who said maybe instead of yes, of course, and we'll see instead of whatever works for you. "All right," he said finally. "Well, let me know." After he left the kitchen, I sat with my dinner and my book, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The quiet satisfaction of being courted instead of taken for granted. For the first time in our adult relationship, my son was making an effort to secure my attention instead of simply expecting it. It should have felt like victory, and in a way, it did. But it also felt like something else. Something that scared and thrilled me in equal measure. It felt like the beginning of the end of our old dynamic, the foundation-shaking prelude to a conversation we'd never had but desperately needed. Later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, I found myself standing in front of my closet, looking at clothes I'd forgotten I owned. Dresses I'd bought for occasions that never materialized. Scarves that added color to outfits I deemed too frivolous for a woman whose primary job was being useful to others. I pulled out a blue dress I'd loved but never worn. Too bright, too attention-seeking for someone who'd trained herself to be invisible. I held it up against myself in the mirror, and for the first time in years, I liked what I saw. Not just the dress, though it was beautiful. I liked the woman holding it. The woman who was making choices based on what she wanted instead of what everyone else needed. The woman who was remembering that she had preferences, desires, dreams that didn't require anyone else's permission to pursue. I hung the dress on the front of the closet where I'd see it first thing in the morning. Tomorrow, I decided, I was going to wear it somewhere. Not anywhere special, necessarily. Maybe just to the grocery store or the bank or my pottery class. But I was going to wear it because I wanted to, because it made me feel beautiful, because I was finally ready to be seen by the person whose opinion mattered most. Myself. As I settled into bed that night, I felt a strange mix of calm and anticipation. Like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, not to jump into danger, but to finally spread wings I'd forgotten I had. Something was building inside me. Not anger anymore, not sadness. Something much more powerful. The quiet certainty of a woman who'd remembered her own worth. And I had a feeling that very soon, everyone else was going to remember it too. The final breaking point came on a Tuesday in December. Cold and gray with the kind of bone-deep chill that makes you want to stay inside and drink tea by the fireplace. I'd been having a particularly good day. My pottery class had gone well, I'd had lunch with Patricia, and I'd come home feeling content with my own company and my own choices. I was in the kitchen making myself a cup of cocoa when Evan burst through the front door like a tornado, slamming it hard enough to rattle the windows. "This is unbelievable," he announced to no one in particular, though I was the only audience available. "Marcus got that job I applied for, the one at the marketing firm downtown." I stirred my cocoa slowly, waiting to see if this was the beginning of a conversation or just a declaration that required no response from me. "I mean, what does Marcus have that I don't have?" Evan continued, pacing between the kitchen and living room like a caged animal. "We have the same degree. I have better grades. I've got just as much experience. I'm sorry you didn't get the job," I said, because it seemed like the kind thing to say, even though I wasn't entirely sure he'd actually applied for any job recently. "That's not the point," he snapped, whirling around to face me with an intensity that reminded me uncomfortably of his teenage years, when every setback was everyone else's fault, and every disappointment was evidence that the world was conspiring against him. "What is the point?" I asked gently. "The point is that nothing ever goes right for me. The point is that I'm 28 years old, and I'm stuck living at home with my mother while my friends are getting careers and apartments and actual adult lives. Living at home with his mother. Like I was a burden he'd been forced to bear rather than a woman who'd offered him shelter and support while he figured things out. "You could get an apartment," I said mildly. "Nothing stopping you from moving out." He stared at me like I'd suggested he sprout wings and fly to the moon. "With what money? Do you know how expensive rent is? Do you know how impossible it is to save money when everything costs so much?" I took a sip of my cocoa and considered this. Yes, I did know how expensive things were. I'd been managing household expenses for decades, stretching dollars and finding ways to make ends meet on budgets that never seemed quite adequate for everything we needed. "It is expensive," I agreed. "But people manage it. People whose parents help them," Evan shot back. "People who have families that actually support them instead of just existing. Just existing." That's what I'd been reduced to in his mind. Not supporting him by providing free housing, free utilities, free food, free laundry service, and a constant safety net that allowed him to take risks without consequences. Just existing. "I see," I said quietly. "Do you?" he demanded, his voice rising to a pitch that reminded me of his father when David was frustrated about something at work. "Do you see how impossible you've made everything? Do you see how living here makes me look like a loser who can't take care of himself?" The irony was so thick I could have spread it on bread. Living in my house made him look like someone who couldn't take care of himself, but actually taking care of himself apparently wasn't an option because that would be too difficult. "How have I made things impossible?" I asked, genuinely curious now. "By not helping." The words exploded out of him with months of pent-up frustration. "By acting like my problems aren't your problems anymore. By pretending like you don't care if I succeed or fail." "I do care if you succeed," I said truthfully. "I want nothing more than for you to be happy and fulfilled and independent." "Then help me." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with expectation and entitlement, and a complete misunderstanding of what help actually looked like. "How?" I asked. "What kind of help do you want?" "I don't know," he said, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "Money for a deposit on an apartment. Help with my resume. Connections through your nursing friends who might know someone who's hiring. Something. Anything that shows you actually care about my future instead of just focusing on yourself all the time. Focusing on myself all the time." 3 months of pottery classes and having lunch with friends and wearing clothes I liked apparently constituted obsessive self-focus in his mind. "Evan," I said, setting down my cocoa with hands that were surprisingly steady. "I've been helping you for 28 years. I've been helping you for so long that I forgot how to help myself. And when I finally started learning how to do that, you decided I was selfish. That's not what I—" "Yes, it is," I interrupted. And my voice was still calm, but there was steel in it now. "When I made special dinners to try to connect with you, you called it pathetic. When I tried to take interest in your hobbies, you told me I wouldn't understand. When I cooked your favorite meals and set the table with candles, you were embarrassed by my desperation." His face was flushing now. Whether from anger or shame, I couldn't tell. "But now that I've stopped doing those things, now that I've stopped organizing my entire life around your comfort and convenience, suddenly you want my help. Suddenly you want me to care about your problems and your future and your success." "I always wanted that," he said, but his voice was smaller now, less certain. "No," I said, and I was surprised by how clear my thinking was, how calm I felt in the middle of what should have been an emotional storm. "You wanted me to solve your problems without acknowledging that I was doing it. You wanted me to care about your future without having any input into your decisions. You wanted me to help you without requiring anything from you in return, not even basic respect." We stood there looking at each other across the kitchen island, and I saw something in his face I hadn't seen in years. He looked young suddenly, uncertain, like the little boy who used to crawl into bed with me when thunderstorms scared him. I don't know how to do this, he said quietly. I don't know how to be an adult. I know, I said, and my heart broke a little for both of us. But you'll never learn if I keep doing it for you. And I'll never remember who I am if I keep pretending that your life is more important than mine. The silence that followed was different from all the other silences we'd shared lately. This one was full of recognition, of truths that had finally been spoken aloud, of a relationship that was shifting into something neither of us knew how to navigate. So what happens now? He asked. I looked around the kitchen, in my house, that I'd been sharing with someone who saw my presence as an inconvenience and my absence as abandonment. I thought about the blue dress hanging in my closet, about the pottery classes that made my hands happy, about the friends who laughed with me about things that had nothing to do with being anyone's mother. Now, I said, I'm going to pack a bag. What? I'm going to pack a bag, I repeated, moving toward the stairs with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I'm going to find myself a little apartment somewhere quiet, maybe closer to downtown where I can walk to my pottery studio. I'm going to live like a person instead of like a service provider. You can't be serious, he said, following me upstairs. You can't just leave. This is your house. Yes, it is, I agreed, opening my closet and pulling out a suitcase that had been gathering dust for years. Which means I can also choose not to live in it if living in it makes me feel invisible and unappreciated and taken for granted. I started folding clothes with the efficient movements of someone who'd made a decision and wasn't going to be talked out of it. The blue dress went in first, followed by other pieces I'd forgotten I owned, clothes that made me feel like myself instead of like someone's mother. You're really doing this, Evan said from the doorway, and his voice was hollow with disbelief. I'm really doing this. But where will you go? I'll figure it out, I said, packing my jewelry box and the photos I wanted to keep. Pictures of David, baby pictures of Evan from when he still looked at me like I was the most important person in his world. I'm 58 years old. I've been taking care of other people my entire adult life. I think I can manage to take care of myself. I packed efficiently, taking only what I needed and what mattered to me. Not the expensive things or the practical things, but the personal things, the books I loved, the scarf David had given me for our anniversary, the coffee mug Patricia had made for me in our pottery class. When my suitcase was full, I zipped it closed and set it by the bedroom door. Then I sat down at my desk and wrote a letter. Not a long one, not an angry one, just a clear explanation of what I was doing and why. Evan, I'm not leaving because I don't love you. I'm leaving because I've forgotten how to love myself. And I can't be anyone's mother until I remember how to be my own person. The bills are on automatic payment through the end of the year. After that, you'll need to decide whether you want to keep the house or find something more affordable. Either choice is fine, but it's your choice to make. I'll call you in a few weeks when I've had time to settle somewhere. I hope by then we can talk like two adults who care about each other, instead of like a disappointed son and a mother who's tired of disappointing him. I love you. That's exactly why I have to do this. Mom. I left the letter on his pillow, picked up my suitcase, and walked down the stairs one last time as a woman who lived in this house. Evan was standing in the living room, staring at me like he still couldn't quite believe this was happening. Mom, he said, and his voice cracked on the word. Please don't do this. We can figure it out. We can make it work. I stopped at the front door and looked back at him. Really looked at him, memorizing his face in case it was a long time before I saw it again. We can't make it work, sweetheart, I said gently. But maybe, if we're both brave enough to figure out who we are separately, we can build something better than what we had. I opened the door and stepped into the cold December evening, carrying my suitcase and my newfound freedom. Behind me, I heard Evan call my name one more time, but I didn't turn around. For the first time in years, I was walking toward something instead of away from it. I was walking toward myself, and it felt like coming home. 3 months later, I was standing in the kitchen of my small apartment downtown, making coffee in a mug I'd thrown myself in pottery class, when my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. Saturday mornings had become sacred to me, quiet hours when I could sit by my window and watch the world wake up without anyone needing anything from me. But something made me glance at the screen. Evan's name appeared there, and my heart did a little skip. Not with anxiety, like it used to, but with something softer. Hope? Maybe. Or just the quiet love that never really goes away, no matter how much distance you need to put between yourself and the person who carries it. "Hello, sweetheart," I said, and my voice was calmer than I'd expected. "Mom." He sounded different. Older somehow, like the 3 months had aged him in ways that the previous 3 years hadn't. Could I come see you? Please?" I looked around my little apartment. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a tiny kitchen that opened onto a living room barely big enough for a couch and a bookshelf. It was smaller than my old bedroom, but it was entirely mine. Every picture on the wall, every book on the shelf, every plant on the windowsill was there because I'd chosen it, because it made me happy, because it reflected who I was becoming, instead of who I'd always been. "Of course," I said. "I'll text you the address." An hour later, there was a soft knock on my door. When I opened it, I hardly recognized the young man standing in my hallway. Evan looked thinner and tired in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair needed cutting, and there was something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Humility. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly. "Come in," I said, stepping back to let him enter my new world. "Would you like some coffee?" He nodded, following me into the kitchen, and I noticed how he looked around with careful attention, like he was trying to understand something important about this space I'd created for myself. "It's nice," he said, and he sounded like he meant it. "Small, but it feels like you." I poured him coffee in a regular mug. I only had the 1 handmade cup, and somehow that felt important to keep for myself. We settled on my small couch, and for a few minutes we just sat there, drinking coffee and looking at each other like we were trying to remember how to have a conversation. "I got the job," he said finally. "The marketing position. Marcus turned it down. Apparently he got something better, and they offered it to me." "That's wonderful," I said, and I meant it. "I'm proud of you." "I moved out of the house," he continued, staring into his coffee cup. "Got a studio apartment across town. It's not much, but it's mine. I'm paying rent, buying my own groceries, doing my own laundry." He looked up at me with something that might have been pride mixed with embarrassment. "Turns out I can take care of myself after all." "I never doubted that you could," I said gently. "I just knew you never would as long as someone else was doing it for you." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and then he set down his coffee cup and turned to face me fully. "Mom, I need to tell you something, and I don't know how to say it without sounding like I'm making excuses, but I need to say it anyway." I waited. "I was angry," he said, and his voice was thick with emotion I hadn't heard from him in years. "After Dad died, I was so angry, and I didn't know what to do with it. I was angry that he left us, angry that I had to grow up without him, angry that you had to work so hard, angry that our life wasn't what I thought it was supposed to be." He paused, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "And I think I blamed you for not being him. I blamed you for not being able to replace what we lost. I blamed you for being tired and stressed and human instead of being some perfect mother who could fix everything and make it all okay." My throat was tight with unshed tears, but I didn't interrupt. This was something he needed to say, and something I needed to hear. "But mostly," he continued, "I blamed you for loving me so much that you made it too easy for me to never grow up. I blamed you for being so willing to take care of everything that I never had to learn how to take care of myself." He looked around my apartment again, at the evidence of my independent life, at the woman I'd become when I stopped trying to be everything to everyone else. "I was wrong," he said simply, "about all of it. You weren't supposed to replace Dad. You weren't supposed to fix everything. You weren't supposed to sacrifice yourself so completely that you disappeared." I reached over and took his hand, not to comfort him exactly, but just to connect with him, person to person instead of mother to son. "You weren't supposed to carry all that anger by yourself either," I said. "I should have gotten you help. I should have gotten myself help. I should have understood that we were both grieving and both lost, and neither of us could fix that for the other." "I treated you terribly," he said, and now the tears were flowing freely. "I treated you like you were nothing more than a service I was entitled to, like your whole life was supposed to revolve around making mine easier. I called you pathetic for trying to connect with me, and then I called you selfish for finally connecting with yourself." "Yes," I said quietly, "you did." He flinched at my honesty, but I wasn't trying to hurt him. I was just done pretending that the truth was too dangerous to speak. "I'm sorry," he said, and the words came out broken, like they were scraping his throat raw. "I'm so sorry, Mom. Not just for the last few months, but for years of taking you for granted. For years of thinking you existed to make my life better without me having to make yours better in return." I squeezed his hand gently. "I know you are. Can you forgive me?" he asked, and in his voice I heard the little boy who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms, who used to trust me to make everything better with a kiss and a story. "I already have," I said, and it was true. Somewhere in the quiet months of learning to live for myself, the anger had transformed into something softer, not forgiveness that forgot or excused, but forgiveness that chose love over resentment. But forgiveness doesn't mean going back to the way things were. He nodded, wiping his face with his sleeve. "I don't want to go back. The way things were wasn't good for either of us, was it?" "No," I agreed. "It wasn't." We talked for hours that day. Really talked, like two adults who cared about each other and wanted to understand how to have a relationship that wasn't built on one person's needs, consuming the other person's identity. He told me about his job, about the challenges of living alone, about the friends he was making who saw him as someone capable and independent, rather than as someone's son who needed taking care of. I told him about my pottery classes, about the friends I'd made, about the volunteer work I'd started doing at a literacy center downtown. I told him about the woman I was discovering myself to be when I wasn't busy being anyone's mother or caretaker or solution to problems I hadn't created. When he got ready to leave, he paused at my door. "Could I take you to dinner next week?" he asked. "Somewhere nice. My treat. Not because I need something or because I feel guilty, but just because I'd like to spend time with you, with the person you're becoming." I smiled, thinking of all the times I'd begged for exactly this kind of invitation, all the special dinners I'd cooked hoping to create the connection he was now offering freely. "I'd like that," I said. "But let me check my calendar. I'm pretty busy these days." He laughed, actually laughed, and it was the first genuine joy I'd heard from him in years. "You're pretty amazing, you know that?" he said. "I'm learning," I replied. 6 months later, we have dinner together every few weeks. Sometimes we go to restaurants. Sometimes I cook for both of us in my little kitchen. Sometimes he brings groceries and we cook together while he tells me about his work, and I tell him about my pottery. And we both marvel at how much easier it is to love each other when we're both whole people instead of broken pieces trying to fit together in ways that were never going to work. He's dating someone now, a lovely woman named Sarah who treats him as an equal instead of as someone who needs managing. She's studying to be a teacher, and when I met her, she shook my hand and said, "Evan talks about you all the time. He's so proud of your independence." Proud of my independence. From the son who once called me pathetic for trying too hard and selfish for not trying at all. People ask me sometimes if I regret leaving, if I wish I'd found another way to solve our problems. The answer is complicated. Like most truths about love and family and the courage it takes to save relationships by being willing to lose them. I don't regret leaving because leaving taught both of us something we never could have learned any other way. It taught Evan that love isn't something you can take without giving, that relationships require two whole people choosing each other rather than one person absorbing herself into another person's needs. It taught me that I am worth more than my usefulness to others, that my happiness matters as much as anyone else's, that the most loving thing you can sometimes do is refuse to enable someone else's immaturity. Most importantly, it taught us both that real love, the kind that lasts, the kind that nurtures instead of consumes, requires boundaries. It requires two people who know who they are as individuals and choose to share their lives instead of losing themselves in each other's expectations. I'm 60 now, and I have a life that belongs entirely to me. I have friends who knew me before I was anyone's mother, and who will know me long after my mothering days are behind me. I have hobbies that challenge me, work that fulfills me, and a small apartment that reflects my tastes and values and dreams. And I have a son who calls me not because he needs something, but because he wants to share his life with someone he respects, who brings me flowers on Mother's Day not out of obligation, but out of genuine gratitude for the woman who loved him enough to teach him how to love himself, who introduces me to his friends as someone he's proud to know, not just someone he's related to. It took me 58 years to learn that you can't love someone into loving you back, but you can love yourself enough to stop accepting less than you deserve. It took me that long to understand that the most powerful thing you can sometimes say to someone is not, "I'll do anything for you, but I won't do this anymore." The story people want to hear is that my son learned his lesson and begged me to come back, that everything returned to the way it was before but with more appreciation. That's not what happened. What happened was better than that. We both learned to become people worth knowing, and then we chose to know each other. Not out of obligation or guilt or desperate need, but out of genuine affection and respect. That's not the ending I once dreamed of, but it's the one that saved us both. And sometimes, being saved looks different than being rescued. Sometimes it looks like walking away from everything you thought you wanted so you can discover everything you actually needed. Sometimes the most loving thing a mother can do is teach her child that even mothers are people first, and people don't have to earn love by disappearing into someone else's story. I learned that love isn't about sacrificing yourself until there's nothing left. It's about being whole enough that you have something real to offer, strong enough that you can't be taken for granted, and brave enough to let people choose you freely, rather than keeping them close through guilt or need or habit. My name is Tessa, I'm 60 years old, and I matter. Not because I'm useful to someone else, not because I solve problems or provide services or make anyone's life easier. I matter because I exist, because I have value, because I am a person worthy of love and respect and consideration. It took me almost losing myself completely to remember that truth, but once I remembered it, everything else became possible.